Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Hello, welcome to New York Parrot Literary Corner. I'm Dustin Pickering, your noble and honest host at times. And today we have Davidson Garrett, who is a native of Shreveport, Louisiana. He trained for the theater at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts and graduated from the City College of New York in 1988 with an MS in education. His poetry, fiction, and articles have been published in the New York Times, the Episcopal New Yorker, Xavier Review in New Orleans, Sensations Magazine, Third Wednesday, Marco Polo Arts Mag, Big City Lit, the website of the Beat Museum in San Francisco, and in Podium, the online literary journal of the 92nd Street Y. Davidson is the author of the poetry collection King Lear of the Taxi, published by Advent Purple Press. His chapbook, To Tell the Truth I Wanted to Be Kitty Carlisle, and Other Poems, was published in 2013 by Finishing Line Press. In 2017, Advent Purple Press published Davidson's newest chapbook, What Happened to the Man Who Taught Me Beowulf, and Other Poems. In 2020, Kelsey Books published his collection of poems, Arias of a Rhapsodic Spirit. Davidson is a retired New York City taxi driver who drove for 40 years to help subsidize his art. And if you're curious about any more about information about Davidson, then check out his Poet Writers site, or you can just look at our flyer. So thank you for joining us today, Davidson. How are you?
It's my pleasure to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. I'm doing pretty good. You know, retired is the best job I've ever had.
Oh, yeah, and, excellent. Retired
so
is
I'm
the
happy.
only job worth doing.
Well, you know, I feel like I earned it. You know, having survived Manhattan for almost half a century and doing a variety of jobs. The taxi was one of many. I think anyone in the arts is going to probably have a long resume of survival jobs in their portfolio.
Right, I think so too. You know, you have to do what you have to do to subsidize your art. You're not going to strike it big unless you're Stephen King or somebody like that who happens to, you know, I guess, luck and skill combined with him to make him the famous and rich author, the wealthy author he is. So, getting to the interview questions, do you think your background in drama inform your sensibilities and tastes?
Oh, most definitely. I'll give you a little bit of my history with the drama.
Okay.
I grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, which is a small town. It's not that small, but I studied since the age of 5 years old. I had my first acting class. There was a wonderful, wonderful woman in Shreveport named Dorothy Davies Miller. She was the wife of a very well-known scenic designer and theater designer named James Hull Miller, and they were both based in Shreveport. And Dorothy had been an actress and a dancer in the Marx Brothers movies. And she had a class called Creative Dramatics for Children. And I was 5 years old, and my mother enrolled me in that class. And the very, very first class was Dorothy reading this poem by Amy Lowell called Seashell. Seashell, seashell, sing me a song of, oh, please. It's a very famous poem. And after she read it, she said, now I want you to perform this poem. In other words, the word was made flesh and dwelt within me, to paraphrase St. John. I always associated language with drama from that moment on. And because my background was theater, up until I was in my early 30s, I read a lot of verse dramas. I read a lot of plays. I read a lot of Greek dramas. And a lot of the theatrical literature is very poetic. So that language was in my ears from a very early age. And another thing that inspired my poetry was I was a huge music fan, classical music mostly, and opera.
Mhm.
And when I was a teenager, I used to go to song recitals, usually by a baritone or a tenor or a soprano. And they would do songs in different languages, but all the songs were based on poems. I heard my first Wallace Stevens poem when I was about 16 with a song that Leontine Price, the opera singer sang at one of her
Mhm.
recitals. And I heard a lot of the French surrealist poetry in art songs. A lot of them were set to music. So that was really wonderful for me because I could go from those song recitals. I would some of the poet who wrote this particular lyric to the song, and I would look up the poet and read some of their work, and that inspired me to start slowly exploring contemporary poetry. My mother had a lot of poetry at home of classical poetry, you know, like Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Shakespeare and that sort of thing. But I hadn't really explored contemporary poetry until I was a little bit older.
Hmm. So what were some of your favorite roles to play in your theater, film, and television?
Well, the one that I'll be famous for forever was I was a dead body in Law and Order.
Mm.
That took a lot of, that was a very intense night. I was in a scene with Jerry Orbach, and I had to play a dead body, literally, that was
Mhm.
dug out from the East River. And that's my little form of a joke today about your question.
Okay.
But that's probably the one that most people would remember. To be honest with you, I'll tell you what I was very fortunate about early on as an actor. I was able to be in 2 verse dramas. I was in W.H. Auden's For the Time Being, which is
Mhm.
a Christmas oratorio. It's a wonderful, wonderful work. It's the Christmas story, but very, very high-toned language and just glorious W.H. Auden language. And I
Mhm.
was in 3 productions of that here in New York. And I also was in a very beautiful production of Murder in the Cathedral of
Oh,
T.S.
okay.
Eliot.
Mhm.
I played the 4th murderer, and that was performed at the historic little church around the corner here in Manhattan. And both of those were great experiences for me because I love the language so much. And then I did a lot of film and television work, but very small roles. And I was
Mhm.
in 12 productions off Broadway. I toured Europe and I toured part of the United States in plays. So none of it ever ended up in making myself a full living at it. I always had to do other things to supplement the income.
Mhm.
Very few people make a living from the arts. Even writers have to teach usually in
Right. Right.
universities or whatever. So, but
Very
it was a great,
difficult.
great experience. I
Mhm.
wouldn't trade it for anything.
Mhm.
I really loved the energy of not knowing what your next job was going to be, going to an audition with 400 people for 4 parts and connecting with really interesting people. Actors are very interesting people. Um, the kind you see sometimes on some of the celebrity shows and all of that are not like the actors that I have met or known in New York City. Most of them are very disciplined, well-trained actors who studied for years, loved theater, they loved language, they loved the arts. So whenever you were at an audition or you were working on a movie, doing background work or whatever, there was always fascinating conversation. And I learned a great deal about so many subjects just talking to other actors.
Excellent. That's very interesting. I'm sure a lot of those kinds of people have a lot of interesting stories as well to tell about what roles
Mm.
they've played and the life they've lived, as well as, just in general, just, being able to speak well, and tell these stories in an exceptional way that most people may not be able to tell them in that way.
Well,
Quite interesting.
one of my when you asked me what were some of my favorite things, I had a very, very small part in a play called John by Philip Berry, and it's about John the Baptist. And the actor who played John the Baptist was the wonderful Armand Assante, who is a big Hollywood actor in a lot of movies. And if you ever watched As the World Turns, Elizabeth Hubbard, she played Herodias, Salome's mother. And I was in that was for several weeks and months that we rehearsed that, and getting to work with them because they were consummate professionals at the time. And my one part was at the very end, I came in walking in a white toga with a silver platter. And I was the servant that they were going to put John the Baptist's head on at the end of the play. But that was a wonderful experience. And working with Armand Assante was a really terrific time for me because he was probably one of the most committed actors to the art of acting that I've ever had the privilege of being around. I worked on a lot of movies as stand-ins, which was a lot of fun because you were on a film for 3 or 4 months, standing in for one of the main characters. And I was a stand-in on 2 Woody Allen movies, and got to work with him on a daily basis for about 3 months. And I was also a stand-in on a Stanley Tucci movie, which was called Joe Gould's Secret. And Stanley Tucci, I think, was the absolute nicest director, actor that I've ever had the privilege of just meeting and working with. I wasn't certainly one of the main people, but just seeing him work, I was extremely impressed with his dignity and his graciousness. That you don't get a lot of that sometimes in the world of the arts. And this man was so dignified and so kind. Very kind gentleman.
That's wonderful. I mean, it's hard to find that in the world today in general. There's so much rampant narcissism.
That's why I wanted to be Kitty Carlisle.
Now coming to that, where does that title come from? To tell the truth, I wanted to be Kitty Carlisle.
Well, you're a very young man, and be glad that you're a young man. Kitty Carlisle. She was Kitty Carlisle first, but she was married to Moss Hart, the great playwright. Kitty Carlisle was on a game show from 1957 till the early 70s, I believe, called To Tell the Truth. And when I was growing up in Shreveport, it was one of the things that our family watched together. It was a panelist show where you had to guess who the impersonator was. There would be one person, let's say, I was Eleanor Roosevelt's secretary, and they would have 3 women, and they would read the bio, and the panelist had to guess which one was really Eleanor Roosevelt's secretary. And there were 2 imposters. And you had 4 celebrities, and Kitty Carlisle was one of the celebrities. And she was just one of the classiest people you would ever see. I could actually do that poem for you if you would like. That would probably describe Kitty Carlisle much more vividly.
Yes, please do.
Okay. To tell the truth, I wanted to be Kitty Carlisle. And number 1, what does pianissimo mean? Number 2, who was Franz Lehar? Number 3, who played with Groucho Marx in A Night at the Opera? That 60s game show, To Tell the Truth, introduced America to Orson Bean, Peggy Cass, Bud Collyer, and Kitty Carlisle. urbane, cosmopolitan types, burning black and white televisions with sunny personalities. But it was Miss Carlyle who furnished the class, seated behind a panelist desk, glowing with a lacquered bouffant and smart Chanel dress. She flashed champagne smiles at slick imposters, stumping with false identities, prompting her to bestow on these tricksters a slow laugh like a grand doyenne amused at a ritzy Park Avenue party. Such radiant sophistication earned envious affection from me, a hick in the hinterland, who for a few minutes each week was vicariously transported by Kitty to glittery Broadway or cafe society as I sat transfixed on a designer couch from the chic catalog of Montgomery Ward.
Excellent.
Thank you. I always
I like
laugh
to laugh
because
too.
I call it my signature poem,
Mhm.
and I dedicated it to Kitty Carlisle. Kitty Carlisle was beloved in New York City. She was head of the New York State Council of the Arts for over 20 years. And she would always be going to every opening night at the opera, at the theater. And if you went to an opening and you saw Kitty Carlisle there, you knew it must be something very special. And I wrote
Mhm.
that poem. It was published in Sensations magazine originally, and I wanted to get a copy to Kitty Carlisle. She was around 94 at the time. And being a bold taxi driver, I drove my taxi and I parked in front of her apartment building, 32 East 64th Street, the Verona. And I went to the doorman and I said, I have something from Mrs. Hart. Would you give it to her? And he said, well, Mrs. Hart isn't receiving visitors tonight. She's not feeling well. Well, I was sort of laughing. I wasn't planning to go to her door, to see her, but it was very sweet of him to say that. And the poem was dedicated to Kitty Carlisle, and she died a month later. Not sure if she ever got it, but I did get a letter from her daughter about a year later after this book came out. And she wrote me a lovely thank you for the poem and said that I had
Yeah.
now it's recording again.
Okay, so this
Shall
will be
we?
part B. Go ahead.
Okay. Advent Verbal Press, I started it. It was sort of a cooperative with some other people. I had a wonderful copy editor. We had a wonderful designer. And I learned everything from the ground up.
Mhm.
And the book had been a finalist with Javal Press in 2000. So I felt like it had been vetted a bit. And so I went ahead and did it. And it was tremendously successful. I was really shocked because I thought maybe I would sell a handful of copies. I ended up selling over 1,000 copies, and I was able to sell them in my taxi to a lot of people who don't read poetry, which I loved being an advocate for poetry.
Mhm.
And then I was able to use the book to develop a one-man show called King Lear of the Taxi, which I performed in 2012 at the Boog City Poets Theater Festival. But another
Mhm.
thing that came out of the book is I got a lot of attention in the press, and I was invited to do a reading series by the Queensboro Public Library. And I was doing a benefit for the taxi union here in New York, and it was being streamed live. And there was a filmmaker in London who heard me reading from the book over the internet. And he contacted me and said, Davidson, I really like your book. I like the poems. I'm doing a film in England about taxi drivers in the Midlands, and I would love to use text from your book as for the voiceover for the short film. And I questioned him. I said, his name was Ray Andrew Wilkes. I said, you know, Mr. Wilkes, I don't know why you would want an American cab driver's voice when you have so many British. And he said, oh, Davidson, taxi driving is a universal woe. I never forgot that. And so I did the voiceover for the film in 2008. It was a short film with my text, and the film was called Taxi Driver, subtitled King Lear of the Taxi. And it was shown at the largest film festival in London, the Portobello Film Festival. And the director was shortlisted for Best Director. So I was absolutely thrilled because I got a little bit of international exposure. They interviewed me on the BBC, and so I guess the bottom line is not to be a braggadocio type, is that people who are afraid of self-publishing, you never know where it's going to lead you.
Right.
It can really lead you to some wonderful things. So that on that particular book, that was a winner for self-publishing. So I've been, now with Finishing Line Press, and they're also going to be publishing another book of my taxi poems in 2022. So I'm excited to work with Leah Maines and her company again, because she's just a lovely person. I really enjoy her so much.
Right. And we're thankful she connected us as well as with other artists,
Yes,
so forth.
she did. Right.
And speaking of self-publishing, I actually run a publishing company myself that I started ground up as well, Transcendent Zero Press. That's our company. So I know exactly what you're referring to when you say you don't really know what you're doing at first, and then you kind of gradually pick up things and,
Well, I always tell people there's a big difference between self-publishing and vanity presses.
Right.
Self-publishing is really publishing like any press would publish. You are just in charge of doing all the work, and you're not paying anybody to do it for you. And it's a tremendous learning experience. I didn't know what Bowker was. I didn't know what Sands were. I didn't know that you had to register with the city of New York and register your press officially. I learned a lot about the business aspect of writing. So I would say that it was an extremely rich experience for me, going from the ground up. I did a lot of research, though, Justin. I didn't just do it overnight. It took me a few years to get this thing off the ground. And then I sort of transitioned into the poetry world from the acting world in my early 30s. I was finding it much more difficult to get full-time work. So I started reading everything I could get my hands on about contemporary poetry. And I studied with two wonderful teachers for several years. I worked with the Greek-American poet Dean Kostos, who is one of my favorite poets. And then for about 14 years, for the last 14 years, every year I study with the wonderful Molly Peacock at the 92nd Street Y. And I've had tremendous amount of knowledge from her, studying with her over the years. I've learned so much from her. And now I'm currently in a workshop that I've been in for 7 years called the Penn Worker Writers School, that's headed by a wonderful poet named Mark Nowak. He is a social justice activist, poet, professor, and he started something about 8-10 years ago called the Worker Writers School. And we are all workers, taxi drivers, fruit vendors, street vendors, hot dog vendors, domestic workers, nannies, and people who really work for a living. And we meet once a month in Soho at Penn America, and we talk about our lives. We talk about social justice. We read a lot about world poetry. Mark has introduced us a lot to the poetry from South America. We did a great series on Ernesto Cardenal,
Oh, yes.
an Argentinian poet named Alicia Partnoy. We did a lot of work on Darwish, the Palestinian poet. And so that has really broadened my world tremendously. And it's also a great community. You know, I think many writers, we live in solitude. We write in solitude often. And I think you really have to have a community to be a part of on some level. And I've always been a part of a lot of different poetry communities through the years. One in particular, Sensations Magazine, which is published by David Messenio in New Jersey. It's one of the longest running literary journals in New Jersey. And he has almost like a little repertory company of poets that we've worked with him for years. And this group that I'm with, the Worker Writers School, has been superb to meet people of different cultures, to find about people's background and that sort of thing. And I've also been active in the LGBTQ community of writers over the years. I've been published in a very good journal called Impossible Archetype. And I read for 8 years in a row at the Rainbow Book Fair, which was once a year in New York City in various venues. I don't like to label myself, I'm an LGBTQ poet. I don't like to label myself anything per se, but I'm very proud to have shared my life as a gay man through my poetry. And I would say that's been a big theme, of course, in my life. I mean, I don't know too many straight men that want to be Kitty Carlisle, but among other things. But I've also done a lot of poetry about the oppression of gay people. I grew up in Louisiana during the Jim Crow era, and I grew up in a very segregated town, and I had to deal with racism from the time I was basically out of the womb. And I've written a lot about that. I can share another poem, I think, that kind of is a good theme about that world of mine we've just been describing, if you'd like to hear it.
We have about 10 minutes, so if you can do it in maybe 2 or 3 minutes, that would be
yeah. I'll just do
feel free.
Blasted out of Dixie, my final farewell conjures darkness. Passionate teardrops of freezing rain fall from a sky, sobbing golf ball hail, surprising the slumbering New South, blanketing weary magnolias with snow, turning its fertile land into thick ice. An 800-mile drive on ice ahead, my car flees in winter darkness, a town buried under glacial snowdrifts, more accustomed to gentle spring rain and lyrical breezes singing southerly than for precision bombing by hard hail. The perilous odyssey brings Hail Marys to the lips as the blue auto ice-capades on the slippery highway south of the river that evokes Gothic darkness, while the white night vies for a regal rain, battling the moonlight with clouded snow. Vicksburg surrenders to the Snow Queen. Lazy tongues declare hail has frozen over. Raging gods rain wrath with sharp arrows of dry ice to punish prejudice towards skin of darkness in this frigid heart of the Bible Belt South. Recollections of a boyhood in the South flood my tired mind, recalling snow jobs by cross-burning fools of darkness wearing hooded choir robes, hailing Satan as they packed black bodies on ice, washing the blood away with dirty rain. On the road a last time, nostalgia rains on my brain in this timeless, surreal South. Suddenly, a service station stopped for iced Coke to numb my mind, cold as snow, never to forget the cold trajectory of the hail of kill homos blasting me out of darkness. Rain, snow, hail, ice, a tempest only befits my Southern goodbye as I escape the darkness of hate.
Wow, there's so much there that could, there's so many emotive literary tropes in there that are just incredible with that poem that I really felt that quite strongly.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for sharing that.
It was one
Feel
of my
that
first sestinas.
It's incredible. It's wonderful, and it really, it can hit home. I think anybody reading that, can really catch that a lot of the problems in the South and the communities where there's, still a lot of lingering racism and homophobia and whatnot. All the various bigotries that exist. Still quite a lot of that, and I think it's everywhere, but it seems to gravitate really bad in the historical South. Back in my grandmother grew up in Mississippi, so
Oh,
yeah,
well,
that was one of the worst. I mean, she was right there in the center, so so that was really
well, I'm old enough.
instructive for me.
I'm old enough to know when African Americans had to sit in the back of the bus. They were not allowed to come into the front doors of white people. They had to go to the back door if they were there to work. It was very hard for a person of my age to understand. And I think I will always try to figure it out and why I didn't get trapped into that world. But
Yeah,
I got to see Kitty Carlisle. I think she changed me.
excellent.
I think she was one of the people that I said, I don't want to live down here anymore. I want to go up to where she is with Broadway and New York and all the excitement. And of course, New York was never really what I thought it was going to be. I love New York, and having been a taxi driver for 40 years, it's in my blood. So
Right.
It's good to be here, and we don't know what it's going to be after the pandemic. Everything is quite different. But luckily, the pandemic has been able to connect people through, the social media. And our lives as writers haven't changed all that dramatically. We're still reading our poems online. We're still writing them. We're still submitting them. So the work really doesn't stop, does it?
Right.
Yeah.
That's excellent. And so I hope you're enjoying retirement and so forth as well as writing quite a bit in the period of free time.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I'm a very blessed man. So. Did
Well,
you want to
it's been
hear?
excellent talking with you.
Great. Well, I've enjoyed it too. I don't. Even though I've been before cameras, I'm always nervous when I have to talk about myself.
Right.
Which, I think being a background as an actor, you do have some communication skills, but I was scared about coming and doing an interview with you, I'll be honest. I just didn't know what was going to come out of this little mouth of mine, but it's been very, very, very pleasant meeting you, Justin. And I want to thank you personally for what you do for poetry and for poets.
Thank you as well for joining us.
You give a service to poets, and if nothing else, poetry will help the world. It really will help the world. And hopefully more people will explore it and learn from it.
Right.
And will give us all inner peace within. So thank you again.
And thank you for joining us today, Davidson. It's been wonderful talking with you. This has been the New York Parrot Literary Corner, and I'm Dustin Pickering. We have our anthology coming out. That'll be our series 1. If you haven't got a copy yet, you can PayPal $17 plus free shipping USA, $6 shipping international to paypal.me/nyparrot. And that's paypal.me/nyparrot. You can also get in touch with me, Dustin Pickering, your host and an honest anchor, at Literary Corner at newyorkparrot.com. That's Literary Corner at newyorkparrot.com. And you can also donate to us, same PayPal, which is paypal.me/nyparrot. You can donate any amount necessary to your pocketbook. We don't mind money from donations. We definitely need to keep it going, keeping our program here on the TV. You can also MoneyGram or Western Union any money for the anthology, $17 again. If you want to get in touch with me to do that money transfer, I can give you any information necessary to doing that. So definitely be in touch and subscribe to our channel. If you have not subscribed yet, you're missing out on a wonderful service to the global creative community. We are the best and only TV station offering a service to the global creative writing community and creative community generally speaking. We would like to hear from you. Leave some comments if you like today's interview. Please give us a thumbs up. Thumbs ups we love those. If you don't like it, just leave us a comment. Tell us what we can do to improve and help you out. So we wanted to have a good program, an enjoyable program. We're looking for 1 million subscribers. 1 million. You can be one of those 1 million. Just hit that subscribe button when you're on this YouTube watching this video. If you're not a subscriber, please do subscribe. So thank you again, Davidson, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Pleasant, very pleasant conversation. I enjoyed every minute of it, and you did a great job. And this has been the New York Parrot Literary Corner. I'm Dustin Pickering, signing off.